Okay, first off, the reason this video took a little longer to come out than usual is because I did all the research, had it all planned out, got ready to record, and somehow my entire file got deleted. So I had to do all the research one day, cry myself to sleep the next, then do all the research again. But hey, it's here now, so let's not waste any more time. As many of you may know, back in 1994, the hand-checking rule took a step towards being eliminated. And originally, hand-checking was something that allowed players to keep a hand on the other player's hands, wrists, leg, or body while guarding them. Players also used to be able to grab the offensive player who had the ball and in a way steer them while they dribbled. Something that the Pistons used to stop Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen in those years. And it was something other teams were catching on to too, and something a guy named Derrick Harper was mastering and was using against guards and especially Michael Jordan every single night. But the league wanted more freedom for their guards, so they sent out a video letting it be known that hand-checking wasn't getting eliminated, and defenders could still keep hands on the ball handler, but they weren't going to be able to push each other around like they used to. And in the video, Derrick Harper was singled out as the principal offender. So he was, in a way, the primary reason this new regulation was put into place. And the rule really helped smaller players from getting dominated on the court by anyone bigger and stronger. But it didn't completely ruin things for big men just yet. Because after Jordan retired, big men still dominated, winning 5 out of the next 6 MVPs, and either Tim Duncan led the Spurs or Shaq led the Lakers to winning the championship every single year, until the 2004 NBA Finals, where Mark Cuban was watching the Lakers and the Pistons play, and one-on-one nobody could stop Kobe. But Mark noticed that on nearly every possession Kobe had, he would drive towards the hoop and the Pistons defender would have their hand on him and give him a slight bump with their body. And it was nothing the referees called, but that half second that it stalled Bryant gave Ben Wallace just enough time to pre-rotate and contest his shot. So Mark went and discussed it with the league, and later that offseason, hand checking and the allowance of any contact on defense was eliminated completely. And pretty soon after, it backfired entirely, because in the 2006 finals, Dwayne Wade would end up taking an NBA record 97 free throws against the Mavs and leading the way to beating them in the finals. And since the official rule change, big men quickly found their roles starting to get eliminated. I mean, a true big man hasn't won an MVP since 2004, unless you're including Dirk, but he's not a true back to the basket type of big man. So maybe Mark Cuban's to blame for this one. Michael Jordan also influenced a rule change in the NBA. And we're not talking about the Jordan rules that the Pistons used on MJ in the playoffs. This one is actually referred to as the Michael Jordan rule. See, back before zone defenses were allowed, which we'll get to later, believe it or not, players were forced to either guard their man or double team, and nothing in between was allowed. And this picture is a good example. All of these players have to sit back and watch Isaiah take on Mark Price one-on-one. They could commit to the double team, but then their man would be wide open. So a ton of isolation plays happened back then. And I mean, they say James Harden wouldn't do well with hand checking, but in a system like this, he might not have been able to been stopped. Here's also a picture of MJ in a similar situation. And since the rules were what they were, what he would do is get the ball in the corner and have 2 or 3 of his teammates sit back at the other 3-point line. So once he got past his defender, there was nobody nearby to contest his shot. So the Michael Jordan isolation rule was put in place to prohibit teams from putting 2 or more men on the side of the court opposite of the ball below the foul line. But this wasn't as much of a problem once the zone defenses came along, and that was thanks to Shaq. Using the last rule as an example, sure, it was hard to stop players like MJ and Isaiah Thomas in one-on-one situations, but when Shaq came into the league dominating like he did, there was no way that 95% of players were going to be able to even stop him one-on-one. So he'd often find himself in a lot of situations where he was either dominating a player one-on-one or having teammates ready for the wide open shot. So in 2001, 7 seasons and 1 NBA championship into his NBA career, the league and David Stern were forced to start allowing zone defenses so teams actually had a chance. So defense started going from looking like this to more like this, and from this to this. The game became slightly more of a team game rather than having a lot of possessions, where stars would play one-on-one and capitalize on those matchups. Kevin Garnett, Kobe Bryant, and even Tim Duncan didn't like the rule, and it took some getting used to. I mean, it completely changed the way teams had to assemble their game plan. Defenders can now play in all of the space in between the ball handler and their man, and it made things a lot more of a team effort, but even then Shaq still dominated. Also, the defensive 3-second rule stemmed off of this one. And while we're still on the subject, we can look back to the 1979 and 80 season where Daryl Dawkins shattered 2 backboards with dunks. So immediately after the season, the league implemented breakaway rims to prevent that from ever happening again. And it's probably a good thing, because with how athletic guys are today, guys would shatter a backboard at least once a game. But this whole thing's relevant because it's in a way a rule change, and also because during the 1992 and 93 season, the backboard couldn't shatter anymore. But that's why Shaq was able to bring down the entire rim on 2 separate occasions with his dunks, so the league had to take things a step further and increase the strength of the steel brace to prevent the hoop from ever falling down again. And that's technically 3 rules introduced because of Shaq. But the last major one for him is the Hack-a-Shaq rule, but that's enough about him, so we're moving on to the next rule, which was put in place because of Dwayne Wade. And that was the rule that made jumping into players on a shot attempts an offensive foul. Wade was a master at getting players up in the air with shot fakes, and once fouls started to be called more often, he would get them in the air, initiate the contact, then get to shoot 2 or 3 free throws because of it. It was something that could rarely be avoided, and something similar to when Reggie Miller used to kick his legs out during 3-point attempts. Players would run into him, they would get called for fouls, and he would shoot 2 or 3 free throws. Kicking legs out today usually gets called for an offensive foul, while jumping into players turns out to be a no call. But right around the same time, the league put a stop to another one of Wade's ways of bending the rules to get a foul call. And it was a move done by a good amount of players, but especially done by Wade, Kobe Bryant, and Kevin Durant for the most part. And it's come to be referred to as the rip-through rule, where the defender would have their arms out waiting for the next move, and one of these guys would throw their arms into a shooting motion into the defenders, and it ended up in a lot of easy free throw attempts. I mean, as the defender, it was either play with your arms down and allow an easy basket, or to defend like usual and give up free throws. It's basically a cop-out move and is still used today, but the rule change downgraded it from a shooting foul to a regular foul. Then to switch things up a little bit, and looking at an off-court rule, that brings us to the Derrick Rose rule, created after Derrick Rose. And the rule allows teams to extend players coming off of their rookie contracts to a 5-year deal worth 30% of the team's salary cap, as opposed to the usual 25%. And this special contract is to be used for high caliber players that look to be sure superstars. That is, if he meets these requirements. The player must either be selected to an All-NBA team in their 4th season, or 2 of the previous 3. Same for the Defensive Player of the Year award, or the player must have won an MVP. And this was named the Derrick Rose rule in 2011 because he was the only person eligible for the award since he won the MVP in his 3rd NBA season. And since him, only Blake Griffin and Paul George have signed similar deals. But stemming off of those, the Kevin Durant rule came to be developed. Something you may hear referred to more often as the Supermax contract. And following LeBron's decision to leave Cleveland, followed by a wave of other stars leaving the team that drafted them in free agency, it was capped off by KD leaving the Thunder to join the Warriors. And that's when the league knew something had to be done to try and keep stars loyal to their teams. And the Supermax contract allows players to earn between 30 and 35% of the team's salary cap if they're playing for the team that drafted them or were traded there during their rookie contract. And what makes them eligible is the same rules that apply to the Derrick Rose rule. And so far it's worked for John Wall, James Harden, Damian Lillard, Russell Westbrook, and Steph Curry. And speaking of Steph Curry, his former teammate Zaza Pachulia inadvertently created a rule himself, when, as you probably remember, in Game 1 of the 2017 Western Conference Finals, he closed out on a Kawhi Leonard 3-pointer all the way underneath him, causing him to re-aggravate a previous ankle injury, and forcing him to miss the remainder of the playoffs, forcing the Spurs to get swept. Now it's a big thing that players must be given room to land when they shoot. If not, it'll either be called as a technical or a flagrant foul. And I mean, it should. It's one of the most simple ways in the game that a serious injury could happen. And I'm really surprised it took this long. 50 plus years of playing closing out on shot attempts for this to need to become a rule. But it's a good thing it has. And on that note, Wilt Chamberlain was also the cause of many much needed rules still in use today. The first is not being able to step past the free throw line during foul shots. It came to be when he started to alley-oop all of his attempts off the backboard and dunk them. That's also why the free throw has to hit the rim on a miss to stay in play. Other rules created with Wilt Chamberlain in mind include offensive goaltending, widening the lane from 12 to 16 feet, and not being able to inbound the ball over the backboard. But another rule created with just one player in mind was the NBA dress code that came into play because of Allen Iverson. And he was never directly mentioned by the league as the reason for the dress code, but player attire never came into question until AI came along. And until he started bringing street clothes and that style from outside of the NBA into it, for when he would come through the pregame tunnel and while he would sit out games on the sideline. Other players took notice and started to follow his lead. One player said, "We've been wanting to dress like how we want, but we just felt like we couldn't." but we saw him doing it and started to see that nothing was going wrong. So he started a new culture and really a new feel into the NBA, one that inspired a lot of players at the time and is still inspiring a lot of young players coming up today. But at the time, David Stern wasn't a fan of it, so he quickly put in a dress code that banned sleeveless shirts, shorts, t-shirts, jerseys, sports apparel unless pre-approved, hats during games, interviews, or events, chains, sunglasses, and headphones. In what a lot of fans and players like AI, Jason Richardson, and Steven Jackson all thought was racist. And whether it was or not, it was its own rule, and one that, as you can tell, has pretty much been lifted today. And I think it's staying that way now. But that makes 10 players that forced the NBA to change the rules. This video took a little longer than usual, so if you enjoyed, comment and let me know, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.